comes to energy, it's all about finding the balance between our energy supply and our ever-growing demand. As the world's population swells to 9 billion by 2050, we'll need 50% more energy to power the planet.
Every single person, every single car, every single building is going to use more energy.
Oil fields are beginning to run dry. Oil and coal threaten our environment and climate. And finding fuels of any kind won't be easy.
We're looking at oil up there, oil over there. We're going to look everywhere.
How do we balance the energy our planet has and the energy we will need?
Still just at the first inning of a 9-inning ball game, in my view.
I'm M. Sanjay, and the race to power our future starts now. Did you ever wonder how Earth must look to someone from another planet? It might seem tranquil at first, but if they looked a little longer, they'd see a very different kind of place. A world with billions of people and millions of machines zigzagging across it. This is Earth as it really is. And keeping it all running is a seemingly unlimited supply of energy. On any given day, airplanes log more than 41 million miles, burning some 76 million gallons of jet fuel. Cargo ships travel over 30 million miles, using almost 300 million gallons of oil. Cities light up as over 16 million metric tons of coal are burnt to feed our electricity needs. 4 billion cell phones buzz. Some 700 million cars cruise. And even in New York City, where most people never drive, there are still over 50,000 taxis and limousines. Our planet pulses with both order and chaos. And none of it would be possible without energy.
Homes and villages and towns and cities all bustle with activity because of our ability to harness energy. If we stop for a moment and add all that up, we find out that we humans use an awful lot of it. At least 15 terawatts of energy every single moment.
That's 15 trillion watts of energy burning all the time, every day. We all know a watt is a unit of power. It takes 100 watts to power a standard light bulb. Well, it takes an average of about 15 trillion watts to power everything we do everywhere on the planet every single day. The key to keeping civilization humming is to keep that power coming. And to do that, we have to solve an enormous math problem. We are constantly balancing energy supply with energy demand. On the demand side, we've got people, appliances, homes, cars, airplanes, and cities. Add it all up, 15 trillion watts. And for supply, all the sources of energy we tap to feed this demand. These days, more than 80% comes from what we call fossil fuels. Oil, a third. Coal, a quarter. Natural gas, a fifth. The rest comes from a mix of other energy sources. Nuclear, hydroelectric, and a tiny fraction from wind, solar, and geothermal energy. This has always been our challenge with energy, to satisfy our needs with the available supply of power. And it's getting harder to do. For one thing, demand is rising as our population grows. The more there are of us, the more energy we use. Supply is becoming problematic. Oil is getting harder to find, and it comes mostly from foreign sources. Not to mention potential risks to the environment. Coal is cheap and still relatively abundant. But like all fossil fuels, burning it contributes to climate change. To solve our looming energy problem, we've got to understand it. Both how much energy we have and how much we will need.
Everything we do, from individual actions to actions we might take as an entire species, ultimately affects this balance.
With billions of people and trillions of watts of energy, it's hard to know where to start. So let's try the beginning. Every half second around the globe, one new baby is born. Snap your fingers, and there's another, and another. One baby is cuter than the next. But with each new addition comes just a little bit more demand. Saul Griffith knows this better than most. A physicist and a new dad living in San Francisco, he spent the last year calculating his personal energy use, down to the very last watt.
Certainly having my first child gave me a sense of urgency. The energy challenges of the next century, for him, they're not some distant problem. They play out during his lifetime.
By getting a handle on how much energy we use as individuals, Saul believes we can begin to tackle the growing energy demands of everyone. Today, we're adding people to the planet at a rate almost impossible to imagine. Think of the most crowded place you've ever been. Maybe a rock concert or a football game. Think 65,000 people. The number of people packed into the Citrus Bowl here today gets added to the planet every 8 hours. That's about 200,000 new people added to the world every single day. At this rate, our population will swell to 9 billion by 2050.
It's really difficult to comprehend the numbers until you can feel it, you can hear it, and you can see it. Every person added to the planet is not just adding to the human race, but it's also adding to the energy demand of the planet. And as you can see, pretty soon the numbers get really big.
By 2050, we may need 50% more energy than we do today. And right now, it's not clear how we'll get there. So much energy is almost impossible to fathom. So rather than looking at the combined energy demands of everyone on Earth, Griffith brings these numbers down to a personal level, starting with himself.
And so I'm trying to figure out my own energy use at an incredibly specific level to sort of give a more personal view into those much, much larger numbers. And so that led me to start measuring the energy use of every single aspect of my life. Transportation, housing, the energy in the food that I eat and the production of that food. It turned out my life uses about 18,000 watts of power.
18,000 watts. So if we think again in terms of light bulbs,
an average light bulb like this is a 100-watt bulb, so it takes 100 watts of power to keep this running. If there were 180 of these lights surrounding me, that is how much power is the equivalent of all of the actions in my lifestyle. I'm burning about 180 of these all the time.
It turns out that power usage varies by culture a lot. Average the energy most Americans use: lights, cars, even the energy to grow our food and fly our planes. And it takes the equivalent of 110 light bulbs running every moment of every day to keep our lifestyles going. For the average European, it takes only about half that, 55 light bulbs. Asian, 16. African, 8. Altogether, we humans use the equivalent of 150 billion light bulbs constantly burning. A number we know is on the rise. To make our equation work, we have two choices. We can increase our energy supply or decrease our demand. On the supply side, we can supplement fossil fuels with renewable energy sources and nuclear power. On the demand side, we can reduce the amount of energy we use in the first place. And to start, there's no place like home. If we want to make our energy supply go further, a good place to begin is by reducing our energy demand. And in this country, it's easier said than done. In the United States, a land of wide open spaces, our lives have become supersized. Big homes, big cars, gigantic stores. It's really the American way.
But as our lives get bigger, our appetite grows, and so does our need for energy.
Before we can drive our demand down, we need to understand how we spend all this energy in the first place.
You want syrup?
The Tomlinsons are a typical American family.
Juice?
Okay.
That's enough?
Well,
You must be thirsty. No?
Like most of us,
Want a little bit more?
they use energy without even thinking about it.
okay.
From the moment their day begins. From cooking, to ironing, to showering, energy gets us through the day. Our homes and workplaces account for nearly 40% of U.S. energy use. Most of that in the form of electricity. The amount of energy we use at home has tripled in the U.S. since the 1950s, thanks to our expanding lifestyle. Our houses have ballooned in size by nearly 150%. Larger homes need more heating, more cooling, more electricity, and they hold more stuff. Today, the average American home has 25 devices plugged in at any given time, up from 2 devices just 60 years ago. From electronics to appliances, the modern American lifestyle depends on them. And for every Tomlinson family, there are other families all over the world trying to be just like them. A rapidly growing pool of new energy users. For the Zhang family in China, American-style conveniences have become a necessity.
There are many household electronics here. Essential things, including 6 air conditioners, a refrigerator, a washing machine, 2 televisions, 3 laptops. I think there are enough for basic living.
The problem is, What's considered basic living keeps changing. If everyone lived to American standards and consumed as much as we do, the human race would need 5.4 Earths to sustain itself. The goal is to find a way for everyone to live the American dream, but use less energy. In the US, Saul Griffith is doing just that. By moderating his home's temperature, using efficient lights, walking more, and buying less, he's found he can make a difference in his energy consumption.
In 2007, I used 18,000 watts. This year, 2009, I'll probably get it down to 9 or 10,000 watts. For my son, my infant son, I am fighting for the solutions that will make it work out well so that he has a high quality of life and enough energy. And I think we'll have to be creative.
So let's look at what the numbers tell us. We've heard about changing light bulbs, but what kind of impact can that really have? If every American family replaced all their light bulbs with energy-efficient ones, it would only reduce the world's energy demand by a fraction of 1%. That might not sound like a lot, but it's equivalent to the energy output of 23 coal plants. If no one in the world used electric dryers, and we hung our clothes instead, we could save the equivalent energy of 20 coal plants. Better insulation, more efficient windows, powering down electronics. These changes may not be glamorous, but taken together, they can make a huge difference. Some say efficiency improvements alone can help knock our energy demand down 20% in the coming decades. But there's even more to our energy consumption than meets the eye. Everything we buy or eat carries a hidden energy price tag. If you have any doubts about that, just have dinner with Xavier Bengoa, a professional life cycle analyst. He tallies the energy cost of everything we consume, even a simple glass of wine.
In order to get your glass of wine here, there are probably about 2,500 industrial processes involved at some point.
The pesticides and fertilizers used in growing the grapes, the glass that was manufactured to make the bottle, the shipping, all required energy that's embodied in every sip.
Light bulb or...
That's not to single out wine. A ballpoint pen, the plastic, the ink, the tungsten ball at the tip. It all takes energy to make. The lithium battery in your cell phone, the leather in your shoes, takes energy. Most of the energy behind everything we buy gets burnt before it even gets to us. So if there's one thing that you as an energy expert would do to change your behavior or my behavior, what would that be?
I'd eat less meat. It's just huge, the amount of energy you need to grow a cow and to get a steak in your plate.
Turns out, raising cows takes a long time and a huge amount of energy. You need to feed them for years before you get your steak. Producing beef uses 10 times more fossil fuel energy than a meal of chicken, and 16 times more than a plate of veggies. How much meat do we eat in the West?
In the US, it's about 66 pounds per person per year. It's the same as the energy produced by 15 average nuclear power plants in the US.
That's incredible.
In 1 year. Yeah, it's huge.
So, small changes in our behavior can have a huge impact. Simply being aware of the energy cost of things we consume may help us lower our global energy demand and start tipping the energy balance in our favor. We're going to need to, because one vital energy source that's keeping us on the go may be running out much faster than we dare to think. More than any other energy sources, we rely on oil, coal, and natural gas to power our lives. Altogether, these fossil fuels supply over 80% of our energy needs, and oil is the leader of the pack.
Today, oil is at the center of our entire economy. Goods are manufactured in every corner of the world and shipped in every direction. It's a finely tuned machine, and none of it could happen without oil.
In the US, we consume over 870 million gallons of oil a day. That's 588,000 gallons every minute. These numbers are all too familiar to ecologist Charles Hall, who's been raising alarms about our oil addiction for decades.
This is the essence of our civilization. People say that we live in an information age or that we live in a post-industrial age. That's not true at all. We live in an oil age.
It's taken 300 million years for Earth to produce 1.7 trillion barrels of good, recoverable oil. It's taken us only a few hundred years to burn through it. Many say we've already used half the oil that's easy to get to on the planet.
Any non-renewable resource goes through a period of discovery, figuring out how to use it, an increase, a peak, and a decline as the resource is exhausted. For the United States, the peak in oil was in 1970. We're halfway down the other side of the curve. Well, oil's still here, it's still important, but it isn't anything like it used to be.
Our solution to oil shortages so far has been simple: drill for more. And from miles below the ocean to the frozen high Arctic, our appetite for oil has taken us to places so hostile and remote, they were written off just 10 years ago. The oil sands of Canada are a perfect example. Trapped in this dirt are nearly 7 trillion gallons of oil, enough to last at least 100 years. The reserve is second only to Saudi Arabia's. The trouble is, the oil isn't nearly as easy to get. The oil here can't be pumped like a liquid. It's thick and heavy and requires many tons of earth to be mined and moved.
Every 2 tons of material on that truck is going to be converted into 1 barrel of oil. So if it's got 400 tons of material on that truck, that's 200 barrels of oil on the way down the pipeline.
Before a single gallon makes it to a pipeline, though, the oil has to be extracted from the sand, requiring extreme heat, enormous amounts of water, and a whole lot of energy. In other words, it's starting to take a lot of energy to make energy. Until recently, the beauty of oil has been that it didn't cost that much to get it. Back when we first started pumping the stuff a century ago, it took only 1 barrel of oil to get 100 out of the ground. Today in Saudi Arabia, it takes 1 barrel to get 20. And here in the Canadian oil sands, you have to use 1 barrel to get 5.
We're looking at oil up there, oil over there. We're going to look everywhere. But at some point, it's going to cost you more oil to find the next barrel of oil, or certainly to find and develop it. That's the end of the oil age.
Even if we can somehow find a way to keep the oil taps flowing, continuing to burn it may cause us an even bigger problem. Every time we fire up an engine and put our foot on the pedal, we're sending carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's hard to appreciate since we can't see it. So let's see it. Imagine every mile you drive, your car dumps out a pound of trash onto the highway. Now imagine all the other cars around you are doing exactly the same. Well, that's what we're doing with carbon dioxide. The big SUV, 2 pounds per mile. The giant truck, well, that's 10 pounds per mile. Ships drop about 4,000 per mile. Airplanes, about 250. Add to that the world's coal plants, which dump billions of pounds more. Well, all those pounds start adding up pretty quickly, and they stay in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. And that, most scientists agree, is really bad news for the climate. All this accumulating carbon dioxide is beginning to raise the Earth's global temperature. If we want the climate to stay within a safe range, most scientists say we'd have to dramatically limit the amount of fossil fuels we use by 2050. Instead of making up 80% of our energy mix, as they do now, fossil fuels will need to drop down to about 15%. And our other energy sources will need to make up the difference. But maybe changes in our behavior can lower the amount of oil we need. If everyone cut their driving in half, we would save about 2% of the total global demand. It doesn't sound like much, but that's still 50 billion gallons of oil, equivalent to taking every single vehicle off the road for nearly 40 days. Can't drive less? Not to worry. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Share a ride to work with just one other person. Buy a car that gets double the mileage. Or telecommute 2 to 3 times a week. Each, in effect, halves your need for gas. We can all find unique ways to get our numbers down. But no matter how much we reduce our energy use here in the US, there are important new players on the world stage today. And their appetite for energy is only growing. In fact, rising consumption is the single largest factor upsetting the energy balance in the next few decades. And when it comes to new consumers, China is ground zero. With a rapidly modernizing population, China is said to be the largest consuming nation in the world, just on the heels of the United States. As the most populous country on the planet, 1.3 billion and counting, China will almost certainly shift the balance of the world's energy demands.
Right, and I think
Peggy Liu, director of a Chinese energy think tank, has seen these changes firsthand.
The huge scale of growth that's happening in China and the pace that we're developing at, it's very hard to comprehend what's happening here. I think the best way to describe what's happening in China is the world is at war with energy, and China is the battlefield.
It's not just that there are so many people in China. It's that every year, more of them join the middle class. And that's not just about making more money. It's also about spending it. And that means burning more energy. Today, 20% of the population here is middle class. They can buy homes, take vacations, go to college. And their numbers are expected to double in the next 10 years.
It's amazing to me how quickly the middle class has grown in this country. I mean, take cell phones, for example. A few years ago, there were hardly any. Today, there are over 600 million in use. That's twice the entire population of the United States. And all those people, they're looking for a place to plug these in.
But it's far more than just cell phones. It's an entirely new way of life for a country whose population mostly lived in the countryside just 20 years ago. Zhen Jiang only wants the best for his daughter. A comfortable life, a brighter future. Today, more and more families are moving to urban centers like Shanghai. That's where the jobs are. here in China's sprawling suburbs, life isn't a whole lot different than it is in America.
If you look at an average American's energy use and an average Chinese person's energy use, Chinese people use about a fifth of the energy that an American does. Now, this is going to change as we urbanize. We're going to want the American dream as well, except it's going to be the Chinese dream.
To keep pace with the dreams and aspirations of families like the Zhongs, the country is building on a massive scale. There's new construction just about everywhere you look.
China is building 2 New York cities every year. So that scale is very hard to imagine. And if you think about it, energy is required by every single one of these buildings, by every single car, by every single person that moves into these cities is going to use more energy.
And it's not just China. India, Africa, Southeast Asia are all on the same path. In India, nearly 600 million people are set to join the ranks of the middle class in the next 15 years. That's almost twice the entire US population. Across the globe, families are striving for the same thing, a better life. And their model for development? The United States. Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich has warned of the consequences of population increase for decades.
If we'd had this conversation 40 years ago, I would have said, I think that reproductive behavior is more difficult to change than consumption behavior. I now think the absolute opposite. Around the world, birth rates generally tend to be dropping, but we've been expanding the per capita consumption, particularly among the richest people on the planet. All that consumption requires energy. And as long as we keep going with that, then we're not sustainable. We're going to go down the drain.
For now in the developing world, people are still choosing growth over sustainability. But in China, they're starting to recognize there's a problem.
Sometimes I may not be able to control myself and I buy a lot. But I do have awareness. Buy only what you need. I tell my friends to try not to use plastic bags.
Recognizing the problem is always the first step. But cutting back gets us only so far. So how can we find more and better ways of getting energy? We look to sources that have an endless supply. If energy supply has any chance of keeping up with rising demand, we'll need creative new ways to make up for the shortfall. And that means looking more closely at all the forms of energy around us. And some of them are closer than you think.
Energy is not obvious to us. We don't really see the wind, but we feel the wind. We feel the solar energy as warmth on the side of our face. It's not intuitive because it's not visible. But if we start to look a little more carefully, we start to see all the energy around us, both the ways that we use energy, but also all of the energy forms that we could be using to power humanity.
But are all these other forms of energy really up for the job? Could we increase our energy supply without the help of fossil fuels? Well, let's see. What else have we got? Nuclear power already provides 9% of the world's energy. Griffith thinks it could provide up to 15%. But while it's clean and consistent, it's also costly and controversial. It can help, but it probably can't do it alone. So what about renewable energy? The kind we can collect from sun, wind, and waves. Potential wave energy on our coastline can power about a fifth of world demand.
While it will be useful to use wave power to supply humanity with energy, it's not the entire answer.
Hydroelectric power can supply about a third of our total global energy needs. But that's if you dammed every single river on the entire planet. We've already dammed many of the biggest. We start getting somewhere with geothermal energy. It spews 1.5 more times the energy we all need. Wind is even better. There's enough wind to power the planet 30 times over.
In theory, wind power could power all of humanity's needs alone.
And finally, there's solar. Right now, it only supplies less than 0.1% of our world's energy needs. But there's enough of it out there to power humanity 4,000 times over, forever. There's no question the energy is there, if we're willing to tap into it. And in the US, we have our fair share.
Let me draw it out for you. The United States up there, East Coast comes down. You got Florida down there and Texas here. Well, most of the wind energy is really concentrated in these middle states here. And of course, offshore here and here. For geothermal energy, ground zero is really the Northwest. And of course, the desert Southwest here. Well, that's the hot spot for solar. Trouble is, when you look around here, there are no roads here, there's no infrastructure, and there are no transmission lines. And that brings up a big challenge. How do you get the power from here to the cities where it's needed the most?
About 300,000 miles of transmission lines carry power across the US. But very few of them run to areas where renewable energy is most abundant. So, retooling the grid is one of the biggest hurdles alternative energy has to overcome. The fact is, none of this will come easy. To meet rising demand, we will have to create more energy than we ever have in all of human history. And to do it by 2050, we need to start building right now. Saul Griffith has crunched the numbers. Let's say we want 70% of our new energy to come from equal parts solar, wind, and nuclear. We'd have to install 1,600 square feet of solar panels every second for the next 40 years. One large wind turbine every 3 minutes. And one full-size nuclear power plant every single week. It seems daunting, to say the least. But we've faced challenges like this before and found ways to overcome them.
We've already shown that in 5 or 6 years, you can totally transform the economy. In 1941, the U.S. produced something like 3 or 4 million passenger cars. And then we had a little event on December 7th called Pearl Harbor. And the next year, we started to produce airplanes and battleships and guns. And then in 1945-46, we turned it all around again, and we went back to producing refrigerators, passenger cars, and so on and so forth. When you have the right mobilization, you can change how you use energy.
But do we have that capacity today? There are plenty of car companies out there churning out a car every few minutes. No reason they couldn't do the same with solar panels and wind turbines. We use aluminum to manufacture 110 billion soda and beer cans each year. If we build the same quantity of solar mirrors instead, we could generate over 10% of our total energy requirements in a decade.
Technically, America and all of the industrialized nations need to very radically change what we're focusing our industries on.
It turns out that across the country, manufacturers are already retooling, churning out new technologies as well as jobs. Iowa-based Trinity Structural Towers is doing that one wind tower at a time.
When we found this plant a couple of years ago, it was producing Maytag appliances and shutting down, but it was nothing like a wind tower plant needs to look. Now we've got high ceiling cranes bringing very heavy steel through. We're able to use what this plant already had, convert it to new energy with wind towers, and use a lot of the existing labor that was already in place.
Renewable energy isn't just good for the planet, it's good for business.
Trinity's come from no wind towers being built about 5 years ago to well over 1,000 towers a year. Revenues of about $400 million a year. Shows you that we and others can grow our capacity to meet the wind tower demand.
And there's plenty of business to go around.
How you doing tonight?
Another company, TPI Composites, is building 150-foot turbine blades.
Basically, for the last 18 months, we've been on a 24/7 pace. Our goal is to basically make a blade every day.
The United States has the world's fastest growing wind market, with over 8,000 megawatts coming online each year, enough to power about 2.5 million homes. TPI's plant manager, Kruger Tuttle, is riding that wave.
It really is about the energy future in our country. You know, and that's the sense of calling for me, because we're really doing something that matters.
So there you have it. The energy is out there, and we have the means to harness it. Now, it's time to tally up what we'll need to keep civilization running. On the demand side, we can drop the number of watts and lower our global energy demand by 20% in the coming decades. To bring us the rest of the way, while it's clear we can't rely on fossil fuels as much as we have in the past, they will always be part of the equation. But we're also going to have to rely on a combination of renewable energy sources. We can continue to use our existing hydroelectric power, but add to it more solar, wind, geothermal power. Then add more nuclear energy. Add them all up, and we meet our total global demand. Of course, this is just one way to slice the energy pie. Depending on our needs and emerging new technologies available to us, there may be countless more options. It's going to take all of us to balance the energy equation.
We need to come together and accelerate solutions. And only with collaboration can we get to a green, cleaner planet by 2050.
We've got a long way to go to get there.
It's still just at the first inning of a 9-inning ball game, in my view. It just takes commitment and passion and a willingness to do it.
In the end, it's all about choices. It's clear we can make these numbers work if we really want to. By reducing our energy needs and upping our clean, renewable supply, we can strike that perfect balance. It won't be easy, but if we want our kids and our grandkids to enjoy this world as we have enjoyed it, then we'll have to make the right choices. After all, this crowded little planet is really the only home we've got.